Previously on the 9/11 Blacklist. History will show that on this fateful day multiple things happened that would defy logic and physics. The world was in total shock and by and large adhered to what they were being told. The problem was that the cacophony of lies was taking place, which was hard to follow. George W. Bush and his reactions as President of the United States was the beginning of findings of shocking truths. Chief of Staff Andrew Card was nearby when he heard the news. He waited until there was a pause in the reading drill to walk in and tell Bush. So what did the Commander-in-Chief do with the knowledge that the United States was under attack? He did nothing. A year later, Chief of Staff Andrew Card recalled, "As we were heading to Air Force One, we learned what turned out to be a mistake, but we learned that the Air Force One package could be a target. Not only would it have been advisable to protect Air Force One, but it would have been only sensible as another way to protect Bush on the ground from terrorist attack even before he left the school." In Florida, there were two bases said to have fighters on 24-hour alert, capable of getting airborne in approximately 5 minutes. Homestead Air Station, 185 miles from Sarasota, and Tyndall Air Station, 235 miles from Sarasota. Both had the highest readiness status on 9/11, but presumably, as happened at other bases across the country, just after 9/03, base commanders throughout Florida would have immediately begun preparations to get their fighters ready. Military planes should have been over Sarasota by the time Bush left Booker at 9:35. More than an hour after Air Force One took off, there were still no fighters protecting it.
I mean, do you know if there were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over the building. There's another collision. Can you see it? I don't know.
Shortly after takeoff, Cheney informed Bush of a credible threat to Air Force One. U.S. Representative Adam Putnam had barely settled into his seat on Air Force One when he got the news that terrorists had set their sights on the plane. The Secret Service had received an anonymous call. Air Force One is next. The caller allegedly knew the agency's code words relating to Air Force One procedures, and pilot Colonel Mark Tillman was told of the threat, and he asked for an armed guard to be stationed outside the cockpit door. The Associated Press reported that the danger came within the same hour as the Pentagon crash. The threat or threats to Air Force One were announced on September the 12th after mounting criticism that Bush was out of sight in Louisiana and Nebraska during most of the day and did not return to Washington until 10 hours after the attacks. White House spokesman Ari Fleischer said there was real and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were targeted. Bush's political strategist Karl Rove confirmed that there was an inside threat that may have broken secret codes showing knowledge of administrative procedures had terrorists hacked their way into the sensitive White House computers. Was there a mole in the White House? Was this story entirely made up?
Then Air Force One takes off. No fighter escorts are there. And there's also a tremendous reluctance on the part of the pilot of Air Force One to tell the Air Force where he's going. The reports are that a couple of fighter jets finally appear, but they're simply told, follow Air Force One, we're not telling you where we're going. Doesn't really indicate too much trust in the military. indicates rather that the people in Air Force One knew that they were in the midst of a military coup and that Bush might become expendable at any point in the day. And then above all, the centerpiece of 9/11, I think the single most important piece of evidence in the entire day, the incoming threat given to the Secret Service, Angel is next, meaning we will destroy Air Force One. And it doesn't just come with Angel is next, it then comes with a train of cosmic level code words, top secret code words, indicating that behind that threat is a network that has access to the most important secrets of a whole range of executive departments, presumably CIA, National Security Agency, Pentagon, FBI, Justice, Treasury even, the whole array. And that's a threat. The idea is, what they're saying to Bush is, you've got to go on television and start saying, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, 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 and you will remain in office. If you don't, you may be liquidated at any time. You may not see the end of this day.
Was the story made up? Or was there purposes to the story? Well, a well-informed anonymous Washington official said it did two things for Dick Cheney. It reinforced his argument that the president should stay out of town, and it gave George W. Bush an excellent reason for doing so. When Bush was asked in May 2002 why he had flown to 2 Air Force bases before returning to Washington, he said, "I was trying to get out of harm's way." All that's known for sure is that by 11:30, 6 fighters were protecting Air Force One. The F-15s and F-16s could have reached Sarasota in about 10 minutes, yet they took about 2 hours to reach Air Force One from when they were likely first needed, shortly after 9 o'clock. Air Force One landed at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, at about 11:45. The official reason for landing at Barksdale was that Bush felt it necessary to make a further statement. But it isn't unreasonable to assume that as there was no agreement as to what the president's movements should be, it was felt he might as well be on the ground as in the air. There was quite a difference in the protection afforded Bush at Barksdale and what was than what was in Sarasota. Bush was left unprotected at a known location in Sarasota for nearly 30 minutes. At Barksdale, a site that was at the time unknown, Congressman Dan Miller was amazed at the armored equipment and fighters and soldiers with automatic weapons that immediately surrounded the plane. Air Force One left Barksdale for Offutt Air Force Base around 1:30. Air Force One landed at Offutt shortly before 3 o'clock. At 3:06, Bush passed through security to the U.S. Strategic Command Underground Command Center and was taken to an underground bunker designed to withstand a nuclear blast. Bush gave a nationally televised speech at 8:30 in what would later be called the Bush Doctrine. He stated, "We'll make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbour them." Around 9 o'clock, Bush met with his full National Security Council, followed roughly half an hour later by a meeting with a smaller group of key advisors. Bush and his advisors had already decided Bin Laden was behind the attacks. CIA Director Tennant told Bush that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan were mainly one and the same. Before going to sleep, around 11:30, Bush wrote in his diary, "The Pearl Harbor of the 21st century took place today. We think it's Osama bin Laden." A year after 9/11, there were multiple news stories and articles that attempted to rewrite history by spreading a multitude of lies in the press, by telling the story of Bush and his administrative aides and what happened in the Booker Elementary School room. The report said one thing, and the video of the day's events showed something completely different. When the name Bin Laden is mentioned today, the first thing that comes to most people's minds would be terrorism. particularly against the United States. Similarly, the name George Bush, the father or the son, evokes images of each man's time as President of the United States. In the case of George W. Bush, his time in the White House came during the 9/11 attacks.